The Double by Fyodor Dostoevsky, as translated by Constance Garnett. Chapter 1. It was a little before 8 o'clock in the morning when Yakov Petrovitch Golyadkin, a titular councillor, woke up from a long sleep. He yawned, stretched, and at last opened his eyes completely. For 2 minutes, however, he lay in his bed without moving, as though he were not yet quite certain whether he were awake or still asleep, whether all that was going on around him were real and actual, or the continuation of his confused dreams. Very soon, however, Mr. Golyadkin's senses began more clearly and more distinctly to receive their habitual and everyday impressions. The dirty green, smoke-begrimed, dusty walls of his little room, with the mahogany chest of drawers and chairs, the table painted red, the sofa covered with American leather of a reddish color, with little green flowers on it, and the clothes taken off in haste overnight, and flung in a crumpled heap on the sofa, looked at him familiarly. At last the damp autumn day, muggy and dirty, peeped into the room through the dingy window pane with such a hostile, sour grimace that Mr. Golyadkin could not possibly doubt that he was not in the land of Nod, but in the city of Petersburg, in his own flat on the 4th story of a huge block of buildings in Shestelovochny Street. When he had made this important discovery, Mr. Golyadkin nervously closed his eyes, as though regretting his dream and wanting to go back to it for a moment. But a minute later, he leapt out of bed at one bound, probably all at once, grasping the idea about which his scattered and wandering thoughts had been revolving. From his bed he ran straight to a little round looking-glass that stood on his chest of drawers. Though the sleepy, short-sighted countenance and rather bald head reflected in the looking-glass were of such an insignificant type that at first sight they would certainly not have attracted particular attention in anyone, yet the owner of the countenance was satisfied with all he saw in the looking-glass. "What a thing it would be," said Mr. Golyadkin in an undertone. "What a thing it would be if I were not up to the mark today. If something were amiss. If some intrusive pimple had made its appearance, or anything else unpleasant had happened. So far, however, there's nothing wrong. So far, everything's all right." Greatly relieved that everything was all right, Mr. Golyadkin put the looking-glass back in its place, and, although he had nothing on his feet and was still in the attire in which he was accustomed to go to bed, he ran to the little window, and with great interest began looking for something in the courtyard, upon which the windows of his flat looked out. Apparently, what he was looking for in the yard quite satisfied him too. His face beamed with a self-satisfied smile. Then, after the first peeping, however, behind the partition into his valet Petrushka's little room, and making sure that Petrushka was not there, he went on tiptoe to the table, opened the drawer in it, and, fumbling in the furthest corner of it, he took from under old yellow papers and all sorts of rubbish a shabby green pocket-book, opened it cautiously, and with care and relish, peeped into the furthest and most hidden fold of it. Probably the roll of green, grey, blue, red, and party-colored notes looked at Golyadkin, too, with approval. With a radiant face, he laid the open pocket-book before him, and rubbed his hands vigorously in token of the greatest satisfaction. Finally, he took it out, his comforting roll of notes, and, for the 100th time since the previous day, counted them over, carefully smoothing out every note between his forefinger and his thumb. 750 rubles in notes, he concluded at last, in a half-whisper. 750 rubles, a noteworthy sum. It's an agreeable sum, he went on, in a weak voice and trembling with gratification, as he pinched the roll with his fingers and smiled significantly. It's a very agreeable sum, a sum agreeable to anyone. I should like to see the man to whom that would be a trivial sum. There's no knowing what a man might not do with a sum like that. What's the meaning of it, though? Thought Mr. Golyadkin. Where's Petrushka? And still in the same attire, he peeped behind the partition again. Again there was no sight of Petrushka, and the samovar standing on the floor was beside itself, fuming and raging in solitude, threatening every minute to boil over, hissing and lisping in its mysterious language, to Mr. Golyadkin something like, "Take me, good people, I'm boiling and perfectly ready." Damn the fellow, thought Mr. Golyadkin. That lazy brute might really drive a man out of all patience. Where's he dawdling now? In just indignation, he went out into the hall, which consisted of a little corridor at the end of which was a door into the entry, and saw his servant surrounded by a good-sized group of lackeys of all sorts, a mixed rabble from outside as well as from the flats of the house. Petrushka was telling something, the others were listening. Apparently the subject of the conversation, or the conversation itself, did not please Mr. Golyadkin. He promptly called Petrushka and returned to his room, displeased and even upset. That beast would sell a man for a halfpenny, and his master before anyone, he thought to himself. And he has sold me. He certainly has. I bet he has sold me for a farthing. Well, they bought the livery, sir. Put it on and come here. When he had put on his livery, Petrushka, with a stupid smile on his face, went in to his master. His costume was incredibly strange. He had on a much worn green livery, with frayed gold braid on it, apparently made for a man a yard taller than Petrushka. In his hand he had a hat trimmed with the same gold braid and with a feather on it, and at his hip hung a footman's sword in a leather sheath. Finally, to complete the picture, Petrushka, who always liked to be in negligee, was barefooted. Mr. Golyadkin looked at Petrushka from all sides, and was apparently satisfied. The livery had evidently been hired for some solemn occasion. It might be observed, too, that during his master's inspection, Petrushka watched him with strange expectance and with marked curiosity, followed every movement he made, which extremely embarrassed Mr. Golyadkin. Well, and how about the carriage? The carriage is here too. For the whole day? For the whole day. 25 rubles. And have the boots been sent? Yes. Dolt can't even say, yes, sir. Bring them here. Expressing his satisfaction that the boots fit, Mr. Golyadkin asked for his tea, and for water to wash and shave. He shaved with great care, and washed as scrupulously, hurriedly sipped his tea, and proceeded to the principal final process of attiring himself. He put on an almost nude pair of trousers, then a shirt front with brass studs, and a very bright and agreeably flowered waistcoat. About his neck he wore a gay, party-colored cravat, and finally drew on his coat, which was also newish and carefully brushed. As he dressed, he more than once looked lovingly at his boots, lifted up first one leg and then the other, admired their shape, kept muttering something to himself, and from time to time made expressive grimaces. Mr. Golyadkin was, however, extremely absent-minded that morning, for he scarcely noticed the little smiles and grimaces made at his expense by Petrushka, who was helping him dress. At last, having arranged everything properly and having finished dressing, Mr. Golyadkin put his pocketbook in his pocket, took a final admiring look at Petrushka, who had put on his boots and was therefore also quite ready, and, noticing that everything was done and there was nothing left to wait for, he ran hurriedly and fussily out onto the stairs, with a slight throbbing at his heart. The light blue hired carriage with a crest on it rolled noisily up to the steps. Petrushka, winking to the driver and some of the gaping crowd, helped his master onto the carriage, and hardly able to suppress an idiotic laugh, shouted in an unnatural voice, "Off!" jumped up on the footboard, and the whole turnout, clattering and rumbling noisily, rolled into the Nevsky Prospect. As soon as the light blue carriage dashed out of the gate, Mr. Golyadkin rubbed his hands convulsively and went out off into a slow, noiseless chuckle, like a jubilant man who had succeeded in bringing off a splendid performance and is as pleased as Punch with the performance himself. Immediately after his access of gaiety, however, laughter was replaced by a strange and anxious expression on the face of Mr. Golyadkin. Though the weather was damp and muggy, he let down both windows of the carriage, and began carefully scrutinizing the passers-by to left and to right, at once assuming a decorous and sedate air when he thought that anyone was looking at him. At the turning from Litany Street into the Nevsky Prospect, he was startled by a most unpleasant sensation, and, frowning like some poor wretch whose corn had been accidentally trodden on, he huddled with almost panic-stricken haste into the darkest corner of his carriage. He had seen 2 of his colleagues, 2 young clerks serving in the same government department. The young clerks were also, it seemed to Mr. Golyadkin, extremely amazed at meeting their colleague in such a way. One of them, in fact, pointed him out to the other. Mr. Golyadkin even fancied that the other one had actually called his name, which, of course, was very unseemly in the street. Our hero concealed himself and did not respond. "The silly youngsters," he began reflecting to himself. Why, what is there strange in it? A man in a carriage. A man needs to be in a carriage, and so he hires a carriage. They're simply noodles. I know them, simply silly youngsters, who still need thrashing. They want to be paid a salary for playing pitch farthing and dawdling about. That's all they're fit for. I let them all know, if only. Mr. Golyadkin broke off suddenly, petrified. A smart pair of Kazan horses, very familiar to Mr. Golyadkin, in a fashionable droshky, drove rapidly on the right side of his carriage. The gentleman sitting in the droshky, happening to catch a glimpse of Mr. Golyadkin, who was rather incautiously poking his head out of the carriage window, also appeared to be extremely astonished at the unexpected meeting and, bending out as far as he could, looked with the greatest of curiosity and interest into the corner of the carriage in which our hero made haste to conceal himself. The gentleman in the droshky was Andrei Filipovich, the head of the office in which Mr. Golyadkin served in the capacity of assistant to the chief clerk. Mr. Golyadkin, seeing that Andrei Filipovich recognized him, that he was looking at him open-eyed, and that it was impossible to hide, blushed up to his ears. Bow or not, call back or not, recognize him or not, our hero wondered in indescribable anguish. Or pretend that I am not myself, but somebody strikingly like me, and look as though nothing were the matter. Simply not I, and that's all, said Mr. Golyadkin, taking off his hat to Andrei Filipovich, and keeping his eyes fixed upon him. I'm all right, he whispered with an effort. I'm quite all right. It's not I, and that is the fact of the matter. Soon, however, the droshky passed the carriage, and the magnetism of his chief's eyes were at an end. Yet he went on blushing, smiling, and muttering something to himself. I was a fool not to call back, he thought at last. I ought to have taken a bolder line and behaved with gentlemanly openness. I ought to have said, this is how it is, Andrei Filipovich. I'm asked to the dinner too, and that's all it is. Then, suddenly recalling how taken aback he had been, our hero flushed as hot as fire, frowned, and cast a terrible defiant gaze at the front corner of the carriage, a glance calculated to reduce all his foes to ashes. At last, he was suddenly inspired to pull the cord attached to the driver's elbow, and stopped the carriage, telling him to drive back to Litany Street. The fact was, it was urgently necessary for Mr. Golyadkin, probably for the sake of his own peace of mind, to say something very interesting to his doctor, Kreshtin Ivanovich. And, though he had made Kreshtin Ivanovitch's acquaintance quite recently, having, indeed, only paid him a single visit, and that one the previous week, to consult him about some symptom. But a doctor, as they say, is like a priest, and it would be stupid for him to keep out of sight. And indeed, it was his duty to know his patients. Will it be all right, though? Our hero went on, getting out of the carriage at the door of a 5-story house in Litany Street. Will it be all right? Will it be proper? Will it be appropriate? After all, though, he went on, thinking as he mounted the stairs, out of breath, and trying to suppress that beating of his heart, which had the habit of beating on all other people's staircases. After all, it's my own business, and there's nothing reprehensible in it. It would be stupid to keep out of sight. Why, of course, I shall behave as though I were quite all right, and have simply looked in as I passed. He will see that it's all just as it should be. Reasoning like this, Mr. Golyadkin mounted to the 2nd story, and stopped before flat number 5, on which there was a handsome brass door plate with the inscription, Kreshtin Ivanovich Rupin-Spitz, Doctor of Medicine and Surgery. Stopping at the door, our hero made haste to assume an air of propriety, ease, and even of a certain affability, and prepared to pull the bell. As he was about to do so, he promptly and rather appropriately reflected that it might be better to come tomorrow, and that it was not very pressing for the moment. But as he suddenly heard footsteps on the stairs, he immediately changed his mind again, and at once rang Kreshtin Ivanovich's bell, with an air, moreover, of great determination. Chapter 2. The Doctor of Medicine and Surgery, Kreshtin Ivanovich Rupin-Spitz, a very hale though elderly man, with thick eyebrows and whiskers that were beginning to turn grey, eyes with an expressive gleam in them that looked capable of rooting every disease, and, lastly, with orders of some distinction on his breast, was sitting in his consulting room that morning in his comfortable armchair. He was drinking coffee, which his wife had brought him with her own hand, smoking a cigar and, from time to time, writing prescriptions for his patients. After prescribing a draught for an old man who was suffering from hemorrhoids and seeing the aged patient out by the side door, Christian Ivanovich sat down to await his next visitor. Mr. Golyadkin walked in. Apparently Christian Ivanovich did not in the least expect nor desire to see Mr. Golyadkin, for he was suddenly taken aback for a moment, and his countenance unconsciously assumed a strange and, one may almost say, a displeased expression. As Mr. Golyadkin almost always turned up inappropriately and was thrown into confusion whenever he approached anyone about his own little affairs. On this occasion, too, he was desperately embarrassed. Having neglected to get ready his first sentence, which was invariably a stumbling block for him on such occasions, he muttered something, apparently an apology, and, not knowing what to do next, took a chair and sat down. But, realizing that he had sat down without having been asked to do so, he was immediately conscious of his lapse, and made haste to efface his offense against etiquette and good breeding, by promptly getting up again from the seat he had taken uninvited. Then, on second thoughts, dimly perceiving that he had committed 2 stupid blunders at once, he immediately decided to commit a third. That is, tried to right himself, muttered something, smiled, blushed, was overcome with embarrassment, sank into expressive silence, and finally sat down for good and did not get up again. Only, to protect himself from all contingencies, he looked at the doctor with that defiant glare which had an extraordinary power of figuratively crushing Mr. Golyadkin's enemies and reducing them to ashes. This glance, moreover, expressed to the full Mr. Golyadkin's independence. That is, to speak plainly, the fact that Mr. Golyadkin was all right, that he was quite himself, like everybody else, and that there was nothing wrong in his upper story. Christian Ivanovich coughed, cleared his throat, apparently in token of approval and assent to all this, and bent an inquisitorial interrogative gaze upon his visitor. "I've come to trouble you a second time, Christian Ivanovich," began Mr. Golyadkin, with a smile. "And now I venture to ask your indulgence a second time." He was obviously at a loss for words. Yes," pronounced Christian Ivanovich, puffing out a spiral of smoke and putting down his cigar on the table. "But you must follow the treatment prescribed for you. I explained to you that what would be beneficial to your health is a change of habits. Entertainment, for instance, and, well, friends. You should visit your acquaintances, and not be hostile to the bottle, and likewise keep cheerful company." Mr. Golyadkin, still smiling, hastened to observe that he thought he was like everyone else, that he lived by himself, that he had entertainments like everybody else, that, of course, he might go to the theatre, for he had the means like everyone else, that he spent a day at the office and the evenings at home, that he was quite all right. He even observed, in passing, that he was, so far as he could see, as good as anyone, that he lived at home, and finally, that he had Petrushka. At this point, Mr. Golyadkin hesitated. No, that is not the order of proceeding that I want, and that is not at all what I would ask you. I am interested to know, in general, are you a lover of cheerful company? Do you take advantages of festive occasions and, well, do you lead a melancholy or cheerful manner of life?" "Christian Ivanovich, I tell you," interrupted the doctor, "that you must have a radical change of life, must, in a certain sense, break in your character." Christian Ivanovich laid special stress on the word break in, and paused for a moment with a very significant air. "Must not shrink from gaiety, must visit entertainments and clubs, and, in any case, not hostile to the bottle. Sitting at home is not right for you. Sitting at home is impossible for you." "I like quiet, Christian Ivanovich," said Mr. Golyadkin, with a significant look at the doctor, and evidently seeking words to express his ideas more successfully. "In my flat there's only me and Petrushka. I mean my man, Christian Ivanovich. I mean to say, Christian Ivanovich, that I go my way, my own way, Christian Ivanovich. I keep myself to myself, and so far as I can see, am not dependent on anyone. I go out for walks too, Christian Ivanovich." "What? Yes, well, nowadays there's nothing agreeable in walking. The climate's extremely bad." Quite so, Christian Ivanovich, though I'm a peaceful man, Christian Ivanovich, as I've had the honor of explaining to you already. Yet my way lies apart, Christian Ivanovich. The ways of life are manifold. I mean to say, Christian Ivanovich. Excuse me, Christian Ivanovich, I've no great gift for eloquent speaking. You say? I say, you must excuse me, Christian Ivanovich, that as far as I can see, I am no great hand at eloquence in speaking, Mr. Golyadkin articulated, stammering and hesitating, in a half-aggrieved voice. In that respect, Christian Ivanovich, I'm not quite like other people, he added, with a particular smile. I can't talk much, and have never learnt to embellish my speech with literary graces. On the other hand, I act, Christian Ivanovich. How's that? You act, responded Christian Ivanovich. Then silence followed for half a minute. The doctor looked somewhat strangely and mistrustfully at his visitor. Mr. Golyadkin, for his part too, stole a rather mistrustful glance at the doctor. Christian Ivanovich, he began, going on again in the same tone as before, somewhat irritated and puzzled by the doctor's extreme obstinacy. I like tranquillity and not the noisy gaiety of the world. Among them, in the noisy world, Christian Ivanovich, one must be able to polish the floor with one's boots. Here, Mr. Golyadkin made a slight scrape at the floor with his toe. They expect it, and they expect puns too. One must know how to make a perfumed compliment. That's what they expect there. And I've not learnt to do it, Christian Ivanovich. I've never learnt all those tricks. I've never had the time. I'm a simple person. I'm not ingenious, and I've no external polish. On that side, I surrender, Christian Ivanovich. I lay down my arms, speaking in that sense. All this Mr. Golyadkin pronounced with an air which made it perfectly clear that our hero was far from regretting that he was laying down his arms in that sense, and that he had not learnt these tricks. Quite the contrary, indeed. As Christian Ivanovich listened to him, he looked down with a very unpleasant grimace on his face, seeming to have a presentiment of something. Mr. Golyadkin's tirade was followed by a rather long and significant silence. You have, I think, departed a little from the subject, Christian Ivanovich said at last, in a low voice. I confess I cannot altogether understand you. I'm not a great hand at eloquent speaking, Christian Ivanovich. I've had the honor to inform you, Christian Ivanovich, already, said Mr. Golyadkin, speaking this time in a sharp and resolute tone. Christian Ivanovich, began Mr. Golyadkin again, in a low but more significant voice, in a somewhat solemn style, and emphasizing every point. Christian Ivanovich, when I came in here, I began with apologies. I repeat the same thing again, and again ask for your indulgence. There's no need for me to conceal it, Christian Ivanovich. I'm an unimportant man, as you know, but fortunately for me, I do not regret being an unimportant man. Quite the contrary, indeed, Christian Ivanovich, and to be perfectly frank, I'm proud that I'm not a great man, but an unimportant man. I'm not one to intrigue, and I'm proud of that, too. I don't act on the sly, but openly, without cunning, and although I could do harm too, and a great deal of harm indeed, and know to whom and how to do it, Christian Ivanovich, yet I won't sully myself, and in that sense, I wash my hands. In that sense, I say, I wash them, Christian Ivanovich. Mr. Golyadkin paused expressively for a moment. He spoke with mild fervor. I set to work, Christian Ivanovich, our hero continued, directly, openly, by no devious ways, for I disdain them, and leave them to others. I do not try to degrade those who are perhaps purer than you or I. That is, I and they, Christian Ivanovich. I didn't mean you. I don't like insinuations. I've no taste for contemptible duplicity. I'm disgusted by slander and calumny. I only put on a mask at a masquerade, and don't wear one before people every day. I only ask you, Christian Ivanovich, how would you revenge yourself upon your enemy? Your most malignant enemy, the one you would consider such. Though Mr. Golyadkin pronounced this with the utmost distinctness and clearness, weighing his words with a self-confident air and reckoning on their probable effect, yet meanwhile, he looked at Christian Ivanovich with anxiety, with great anxiety, with extreme anxiety. Now he was all eyes. and timidly waited for the doctor's answer with irritable and agonized impatience. But to the perplexity and complete amazement of our hero, Krishnan Ivanovich only muttered something to himself. Then he moved his armchair up to the table, and rather dryly, though politely, announced something to the effect that his time was precious, and that he did not quite understand. That he was ready, however, to attend to him as far as he was able, but he would not go into anything further that did not concern him. At this point he took the pen, drew a piece of paper towards him, cut out of it the usual long strip, and announced that he would immediately prescribe what was necessary. "No, it's not necessary, Krishnan Ivanovich. No, that's not necessary at all," said Mr. Golyadkin, getting up from his seat and clutching Krishnan Ivanovich's right hand. "That isn't what's wanted, Krishnan Ivanovich." And while he said this, a queer change came over him. His grey eyes gleamed strangely, his lips began to quiver, all the muscles, all the features of his face began working and moving. He was trembling all over. After stopping the doctor's hand, Mr. Golyadkin followed his first movements by standing motionless, as though he had no confidence in himself and were waiting for some inspiration into further action. Then followed a rather strange scene. Somewhat perplexed, Krishnan Ivanovich seemed for a moment rooted to his chair, and gazed open-eyed in bewilderment at Mr. Golyadkin, who was looking at him in exactly the same way. At last Krishnan Ivanovich stood up, gently holding the lining of Mr. Golyadkin's coat. For some minutes they stood both like that, motionless, with their eyes fixed on each other. Then, however, in an extraordinarily strange way, came Mr. Golyadkin's second movement. His lips trembled, his chin began twitching, and our hero quite unexpectedly burst into tears. Sobbing, shaking his head and striking himself on the chest with his right hand, while with his left clutching the lining of the doctor's coat, he tried to say something and to make some explanation, but could not utter a word. At last Krishnan Ivanovich recovered from his amazement. "Come, calm yourself," he brought out at last, trying to make Mr. Golyadkin sit down in an armchair. "I have enemies, Krishnan Ivanovich. I have enemies. I have malignant enemies who have sworn to ruin me," Mr. Golyadkin answered in a frightened whisper. Come. Why enemies? You mustn't talk about enemies. You really mustn't. Sit down. Krishnan Ivanovich went on, getting Mr. Golyadkin once and for all into the armchair. Mr. Golyadkin sat down at last, still keeping his eyes fixed on the doctor. With an extremely displeased air, Krishnan Ivanovich strode from one end of the room to another. A long silence followed. "I'm grateful to you, Krishnan Ivanovich. I'm very grateful, and I'm very sensible of all you've done for me now. To my dying day, I shall never forget your kindness, Krishnan Ivanovich," said Mr. Golyadkin, getting up from his seat with an offended air. "Come, give over. I tell you, give over." Krishnan Ivanovich responded rather sternly to Mr. Golyadkin's outburst, making him sit down again. "Well, what's the matter? Tell me what is unpleasant," Krishnan Ivanovich went on. "And what enemies are you talking about? What is wrong?" "No, Krishnan Ivanovich, we'd better leave that now," answered Mr. Golyadkin, casting down his eyes. "Let us put all that aside for the time. Till another time, Krishnan Ivanovich. Till a more convenient moment, when everything will be discovered and the mask falls off certain faces, and something comes to light. But meanwhile, now, of course, after what has passed between us, you will agree yourself, Krishnan Ivanovich. Allow me to wish you good morning, Krishnan Ivanovich." "Oh, well, as you like. A moment of silence followed. "For my part, you know, whatever I can do, and I sincerely wish you well." "I understand you, Krishnan Ivanovich. I understand. I understand you perfectly now. In any case, excuse me for having troubled you, Krishnan Ivanovich." No, I didn't mean that. However, as you please. Go on taking the medicines as before." "I will go with the medicines as you say, Krishnan Ivanovich. I will go on with them, and I will get them at the same chemist's. To be a chemist, nowadays, Krishnan Ivanovich, is an important business." "How so? In what sense do you mean?" "In a very ordinary sense, Krishnan Ivanovich. I mean to say that nowadays, that's the way of the world." And that every silly youngster, not only a chemist's boy, turns up his nose at respectable people. How do you understand that? I'm speaking of a certain person, Christian Ivanovich. Of a common acquaintance of ours, Christian Ivanovich, of Vladimir Semyonovich. Ah, yes, Christian Ivanovich, and I know certain people, Christian Ivanovich, who didn't keep to the general rule of telling the truth sometimes. Ah, how so? Why, yes, it is so, but that's neither here nor there. They sometimes manage to serve you up a fine egg in gravy. What? Serve up what? An egg in gravy, Christian Ivanovich. It's a Russian saying. They know how to congratulate someone the right moment, for instance. There are people like that. Congratulate? Yes, congratulate, Christian Ivanovich. As someone I know very well did the other day. As someone you know very well? Ah, how was that? Said Christian Ivanovich, looking attentively at Mr. Golyadkin. Yes, someone I know very well indeed congratulated someone else I know very well. And what's more, a comrade, a friend of his heart, on his promotion, on his receiving the rank of assessor. This was how it happened to come up. I am exceedingly glad of the opportunity to offer you, Vladimir Semyonovich, my congratulations, my sincere congratulations, on your receiving the rank of assessor. And I am the more pleased, as all the world knows that there are old women nowadays who tell fortunes. At this point, Mr. Golyadkin gave a sly nod, and, screwing up his eyes, looked at Christian Ivanovich. So he said that. He did, Christian Ivanovich. He said it, and glanced at once at Andrei Filipovich, the uncle of our Prince Charming, Vladimir Semyonovich. But what is it to me, Christian Ivanovich, that he has been made an assessor? What is it to me? And he wants to get married, and the milk is scarcely dry on his lips, if I may be allowed the expression. And I said as much. Vladimir Semyonovich, said I. I've said everything now. Allow me to withdraw. Yes, all me now, I say, to withdraw. But to kill two birds with one stone, as I twitted our young gentleman with the old women, I turned to Clara Osovyevna. It all happened the same day, before yesterday at Osiph Ivanovich's, and she had only just sung a song with feeling. You've sung songs of feeling, madame, said I, but they've not been listened to with a pure heart. And by that I hinted plainly, Christian Ivanovich, hinted plainly, that they were not running after her now, but looking higher. Ah, and what did he say? He swallowed the pill, Christian Ivanovich, as the saying is. Yes, Christian Ivanovich. To the old man himself, too, I said, Osiph Ivanovich, said I know how much I'm indebted to you. I appreciate to the full all the kindness you've showered upon me from my childhood up. But open your eyes, Osiph Ivanovich, I said. Look about you. I myself do things openly and above board, Osiph Ivanovich. Oh, really? Yes, Christian Ivanovich, really. What did he say? Yes, what indeed, Christian Ivanovich. He mumbled one thing and another, and I know you, and that His Excellency was a benevolent man. He rambled on. But there, you know, he's begun to be a bit shaky, as they say, with old age. Ah, so that's how it is now. Yes, Christian Ivanovich, and that's how we all are. Poor old man. He looks towards the grave, breathes incense, as they say, while they concoct a piece of womanish gossip and he listens to it. Without him they wouldn't. Gossip, you say? Yes, Christian Ivanovich. They've concocted a womanish scandal. Our bear, too, has a finger in it, and his nephew, our Prince Charming. They've joined hands with the old woman, and, of course, they've concocted the affair. Would you believe it? They plotted the murder of someone. The murder of someone? Yes, Christian Ivanovich, the moral murder of someone. They spread about. I'm speaking of a man I know very well. Christian Ivanovich nodded. They spread rumors about him. I confess I'm ashamed to repeat them, Christian Ivanovich. They spread a rumor that he had signed a promise to marry, though he was already engaged in another quarter. And would you believe it, Christian Ivanovich? To whom? Really? To a cook. To a disreputable German woman from whom he had used to get his dinners. Instead of paying what he owed, he offered her his hand. Is that what they say? Would you believe it, Christian Ivanovich? A low German, a nasty, shameless German, Carolina Ivanova, if you know. I confess, for my part. I understand you, Christian Ivanovich, I understand. And for my part, I feel it. Tell me, please, where are you living now? Where am I living now, Christian Ivanovich? Yes, I want. I believe you used to live. Yes, Christian Ivanovich, I did. I used to. To be sure, I lived, answered Mr. Golyadkin, accompanying his words with a little laugh, and somewhat disconcerting Christian Ivanovich by his answer. No, you misunderstood me. I meant to say, I too meant to say, Christian Ivanovich, I meant it too. Mr. Golyadkin continued, laughing. But I've kept you far too long, Christian Ivanovich. I hope you will allow me now to wish you good morning. Yes, Christian Ivanovich, I understand you. I fully understand you now, said our hero, with a slight flourish before Christian Ivanovich. And so permit me to wish you good morning. At this point, our hero made a scraping with the toe of his boot, and walked out of the room, leaving Christian Ivanovich in the utmost amazement. As he went down the doctor's stairs, he smiled and rubbed his hands gleefully. On the steps, breathing the fresh air and feeling himself at liberty, he was certainly prepared to admit that he was the happiest of mortals, and thereupon to go straight to his office, when suddenly his carriage rumbled up to the door. He glanced at it and remembered everything. Petrushka was already opening the carriage door. Mr. Golyadkin was completely overwhelmed by a strong and unpleasant sensation. He blushed, as it were, for a moment. Something seemed to stab him. He was just about to raise his foot to the carriage step when he suddenly turned round and looked towards Christian Ivanovich's window. Yes, it was so. Christian Ivanovich was standing at the window, was stroking his whiskers with his right hand, and staring with some curiosity at the hero of our story. That doctor is silly, thought Mr. Golyadkin, huddling out of sight in the carriage. Extremely silly. He may treat his patients all right, but still, he's as stupid as a post. Mr. Golyadkin sat down. Petrushka shouted, "Off!" and the carriage rolled towards Nevsky Prospect again. Chapter 3. All that morning was spent by Mr. Golyadkin in a strange bustle of activity. On reaching the Nevsky Prospect, our hero told the driver to stop at the bazaar. Skipping out of his carriage, he ran to the arcade, accompanied by Petrushka, and went straight to a shop where gold and silver articles were for sale. One could see from his very air that he was overwhelmed with business and had a terrible amount to do. Arranging to purchase a complete dinner and tea service for 1,500 rubles, and including in the bargain for that sum, a cigar case of ingenious form and a silver shaving set, and finally, asking the price of some other articles, useful and agreeable in their own way, he ended by promising to come without fail next day, or to send for his purchases the same day. He took the number of the shop, and, listening attentively to the shopkeeper, who was very pressing for a small deposit, said that he should have it all in good time. After which he took leave of the amazed shopkeeper and, followed by a regular flock of shopmen, walked along the arcade, continuously looking round at Petrushka and diligently seeking out fresh shops. On the way he dropped into a money changer's and changed all his big notes into small ones, and though he lost on the exchange, his pocketbook was considerably fatter, which evidently afforded him extreme satisfaction. Finally, he stopped at a shop for ladies' dress materials. Here, too, after deciding to purchase goods for a considerable sum, Mr. Golyadkin promised to come again, took the number of the shop, and, on being asked for a deposit, assured the shopkeeper that he should have a deposit too, all in good time. Then he visited several other shops, making purchases in each of them, asked the price of various things, sometimes arguing a long time with the shopkeeper, going out of the shop and returning 2 or 3 times. In fact, he displayed exceptional activity. From the arcade, our hero went to a well-known furniture shop, where he ordered furniture for 6 rooms. He admired a fashionable table for ladies' use in the latest style, and, assuring the shopkeeper that he would certainly send for all these things, walked out of the shop, as usual, promising a deposit. Then he went off somewhere else and ordered something more. In short, there seemed to be no end to the business he had to get through. At last, Mr. Golyadkin seemed to grow heartily sick of it all, and he began, goodness knows why, to be tormented by the stings of conscience. Nothing would have induced him now, for instance, to meet Andrei Filipovich, or even Kreshtan Ivanovich. At last, the town clock struck 3. When Mr. Golyadkin finally took his seat in the carriage, of all the purchases he had made that morning, he had, it appeared, in reality only gotten a pair of gloves and a bottle of scent that cost 1.5 rubles. As it was still rather early, he ordered his coachman to stop near a well-known restaurant in Nevsky Prospect, which he only knew by reputation, got out of the carriage, and hurried in to have a light lunch, to rest and to wait for the hour fixed for the dinner. Lunching as a man lunches who has the prospect before him of going out to a sumptuous dinner, that is, taking a snack of something in order to still the pains, as they say, and drinking one small glass of vodka, Mr. Golyadkin established himself in an armchair and, modestly looking about him, peacefully settled down to an emaciated nationalist paper. After reading a couple of lines, he stood up and looked in the looking-glass, set himself to rights, and smoothed himself down. Then he went to the window and looked to see whether his carriage was there. Then he sat down again in his place and took up the paper. It was noticeable that our hero was in great excitement. Glancing at his watch and seeing that it was only 3:15, and that he had consequently a good time to wait, and, at the same time, opinioning that to sit like that was unsuitable, Mr. Golyadkin ordered chocolate, though he felt no particular inclination for it at the moment. Drinking the chocolate and noticing that the time had moved on a little, he went up to pay his bill. He looked around and saw facing him 2 of his colleagues, the same men he had met that morning in Litany Street. Young men, very much his juniors both in age and rank. Our hero's relations with them were neither one thing nor the other, neither particularly friendly nor openly hostile. Good manners were, of course, observed on both sides. There was no closer intimacy, nor could there be. The meeting at this moment was extremely distasteful to Mr. Golyadkin. He frowned a little, and was disconcerted for an instant. "Yakov Petrovitch! Yakov Petrovitch!" chirped the 2 register clerks. "You here? What brings you?" "Ah, it is you, gentlemen," Mr. Golyadkin interrupted hurriedly, somewhat embarrassed and scandalized by the amazement of the clerks and by the abruptness of their address, but feeling obliged, however, to appear jaunty and free and easy. "You've deserted, gentlemen." Then, to keep up his dignity and to condescend to the juveniles, with whom he never overstepped certain limits, he attempted to slap one of them on the shoulder. But this effort at good fellowship did not succeed, and, instead of being a well-bred little jest, produced quite a different effect. "Well, and our bear, is he still at the office?" "Who's that, Yakov Petrovitch?" "Why, the bear. Do you mean to say that you don't know whose name that is?" Mr. Golyadkin laughed and turned to the cashier to take his change. "I mean Andrei Filipovich, gentlemen," he went on, finishing with the cashier, and turning to the clerks this time with a very serious face. The 2 register clerks winked at one another. "He's still at the office and asking for you, Yakov Petrovitch," answered one of them. "At the office, eh? In that case, let him stay, gentlemen. And asking for me, eh?" "He was asking for you, Yakov Petrovitch, but what's up with you? Scented, pomaded, and such a swell?" "Nothing, gentlemen, nothing. That's enough," answered Mr. Golyadkin, looking away with a constrained smile. Seeing that Mr. Golyadkin was smiling, the clerks laughed aloud. Mr. Golyadkin was a little offended. "I tell you as friends, gentlemen," our hero said after a brief silence, as though making up his mind, which indeed was the case, to reveal something to them. "You all know me, gentlemen, but hitherto you've only known me on one side. No one is to blame for that, and I'm conscious that the fault has been partly my own." Mr. Golyadkin pursed his lips and looked significantly at the clerks. The clerks winked at one another again. "Hitherto, gentlemen, you have not known me. To explain myself here and now would not be appropriate. I will only touch on it lightly in passing. There are people, gentlemen, who dislike roundabout ways and only mask themselves at masquerades. There are people who do not see man's highest avocation in polishing the floor with their boots. There are people, gentlemen, who refuse to say that they are happy and enjoying a full life when, for instance, their trousers set properly. There are people, finally, who dislike dashing and whirling about for no object, fawning and licking the dust, and above all, gentlemen, poking their noses where they are not wanted. I've told you almost everything, gentlemen. Now allow me to withdraw. Mr. Golyadkin paused. As the register clerks had not got all that they wanted, both of them with great incivility burst into shouts of laughter. Mr. Golyadkin flared up. Laugh away, gentlemen, laugh away for the time being. If you live long enough, you'll see, he said, with a feeling of offended dignity, taking his hat and retreating to the door. But I will say more, gentlemen, he added, turning for the last time to the register clerks. I will say more. You are both here with me face to face. This, gentlemen, is my rule. If I fail, I don't lose heart. If I succeed, I persevere. And in any case, I am never underhand. I'm not one to intrigue, and I'm proud of it. I've never prided myself on diplomacy. They say, too, gentlemen, that the bird flies itself to the hunter. It's true, and I'm ready to admit it. But who's the hunter, and who's the bird in this case? That is still the question, gentlemen. Mr. Golyadkin subsided into eloquent silence, and, with a most significant air, pursing up his lips and raising his eyebrows as high as possible, he bowed to the clerks and walked out, leaving them in the utmost amazement. What are your orders now? Petrushka asked, rather gruffly. He was probably weary of hanging out in the cold. What are your orders? He asked Mr. Golyadkin, meeting the terrible, withering glance with which our hero had protected himself twice already that morning, and to which he had recourse now for the third time as he came down the steps. To Ishmailovsky Bridge. To Ishmailovsky Bridge. Off! Their dinner will not begin till after 4, or perhaps 5 o'clock, thought Mr. Golyadkin. Isn't it early now? However, I can go a little early, besides it's only family dinner. And so I can go sans façon, as they say among well-bred people. Why shouldn't I go sans façon? The bear told us, too, that it would all be sans façon, and so I will be the same. Such were Mr. Golyadkin's reflections, and, meanwhile, his excitement grew more and more acute. It could be seen that he was preparing himself for some great enterprise, to say nothing more. He muttered to himself, gesticulated with his right hand, continually looking out of the carriage window, so that, looking at Mr. Golyadkin, no one would have said that he was on his way to a good dinner, and only a simple dinner in his family circle, sans façon, as they say among well-bred people. Finally, just at Ishmailovsky Bridge, Mr. Golyadkin pointed out a house, and the carriage rolled up noisily and stopped at the first entrance on the right. Noticing a feminine figure at the second-story window, Mr. Golyadkin kissed his hand to her. He had, however, not the slightest idea what he was doing, for he felt more dead than alive at the moment. He got out of the carriage pale, distracted. He mounted the steps and took off his hat, mechanically straightened himself, and though he felt a slight trembling in his knees, he went upstairs. Olsevy Ivanovitch? He inquired of the man who opened the door. At home, sir. At least he's not at home. His honour's not at home. What do you mean, my good man? I've come to dinner, brother. Why, you know me? To be sure I know you. I've orders not to admit you. You brother, you must be making a mistake. It's I, my boy. I'm invited. I've come to dinner, Mr. Golyadkin announced, taking off his coat and displaying unmistakable intentions of going into the room. Allow me, sir. You can't, sir. I've orders not to admit you. I've orders to refuse you. That's how it is. Mr. Golyadkin turned pale. At that very moment, the door of the inner room opened, and Gerasimich, Olsevy Ivanovitch's old butler, came out. You see, the gentleman wants to go in, Elmian Gerasimich, and I. And you're a fool, Alexiich. Go inside and send the rascal Semyonovitch here. It's impossible, he said politely but firmly, addressing Mr. Golyadkin. It's quite impossible. His honor begs you to excuse him. He can't see you. He said he can't see me? Mr. Golyadkin asked uncertainly. Excuse me, Gerasimich, why is it impossible? It's quite impossible. I've informed your honor. They said ask him to excuse us. They can't see you. Why not? How's that? Why? Allow me. How is it, though? It's out of the question. Announce me. How is it? I've come to dinner. Excuse me. Ah, well, that's a different matter. They asked to be excused, but allow me, Gerasimych. How is it, Gerasimych? Excuse me, replied Gerasimych, very firmly putting away Mr. Golyadkin's hand, and making way for two gentlemen who walked into the entry that very instant. The gentlemen in question were Andrei Filipovich and his nephew, Vladimir Semyonovich. Both of them looked with amazement at Mr. Golyadkin. Andrei Filipovich seemed to say something, but Mr. Golyadkin had by now made up his mind. He was by now walking out of Osip Ivanovich's entry, blushing and smiling, with eyes cast down and a countenance of helpless bewilderment. I will come afterwards, Gerasimych. I will explain myself. I hope that all this will be without delay explained in due season. Yakov Petrovitch! He heard the voice of Andrei Filipovich following him. Mr. Golyadkin was, by that time, on the first landing. He turned quickly to Andrei Filipovich. What do you desire, Andrei Filipovich? He said in a rather resolute tone. What's wrong with you, Yakov Petrovitch? In what way? No matter, Andrei Filipovich. I'm on my own account here. This is my private life, Andrei Filipovich. What's that? I say, Andrei Filipovich, that this is my private life. And as for my being here, as far as I can see, there's nothing reprehensible to be found in it as regards my official relations. What? As regards your official... What's the matter with you, my good sir? Nothing, Andrei Filipovich, absolutely nothing. An impudent slut of a girl, and nothing more. What? Andrei Filipovich was stupefied with amazement. Mr. Golyadkin, who had up till then looked as though he would fly into Andrei Filipovich's face, seeing that the head of his office was laughing a little, almost unconsciously took a step forward. Andrei Filipovich jumped back. Mr. Golyadkin went up one step and then another. Andrei Filipovich looked at him uneasily. Mr. Golyadkin mounted the steps rapidly. Still more rapidly, Andrei Filipovich darted into the flat and slammed the door after him. Mr. Golyadkin was left alone. Everything grew dark before his eyes. He was utterly nonplussed, and stood now in a sort of senseless hesitation, as though recalling something extremely senseless, too, that had happened quite recently. Ech, he muttered, smiling with constraint. Meanwhile, there came the sounds of steps and voices on the stairs, probably of other guests invited by Osip Ivanovich. Mr. Golyadkin recovered himself to some extent, put up his raccoon collar, concealing himself behind it as far as possible, and began going downstairs with rapid little steps, tripping and stumbling in his haste. He felt overcome by a sort of weakness and numbness. His confusion was such that, when he came out on the steps, he did not even wait for his carriage, but walked across the muddy court to it. When he reached his carriage and was about to get into it, Mr. Golyadkin uttered an inward desire to sink into the earth, or to hide in a mousehole together with his carriage. It seemed to him that everything in Osip Ivanovich's house was looking at him now out of every window. He knew that he would certainly die on the spot if he were to go back. "What are you laughing at, blockhead?" he said in a rapid manner to Petrushka, who was preparing to help him into the carriage. "What should I laugh at? I'm not doing anything. Where are we to drive now?" "Go home! Drive on!" "Home! Off!" shouted Petrushka, climbing onto the footboard. What a crow's croak, thought Mr. Golyadkin. Meanwhile, the carriage had driven a good distance from Ishmaelovsky Bridge. Suddenly our hero pulled the cord with all of his might and shouted the driver to turn back at once. The coachman turned the horses and, within 2 minutes, was driving into Osip Ivanovich's yard again. Don't, you fool! Back!" shouted Mr. Golyadkin, and as though he were expecting this order, the driver made no reply but, without stopping at the entrance, drove all round the courtyard and out into the street again. Mr. Golyadkin did not drive home, but, after passing the Semyonovsky Bridge, told the driver to return to a side street and stop near a restaurant of rather modest appearance. Getting out of the carriage, our hero settled up with the driver, and so got rid of his equipage at last. He told Petrushka to go home and await his return, while he went into the restaurant, took a private room, and ordered dinner. He felt very ill, and his brain was in the utmost confusion and chaos. For a long time, he walked up and down the room in agitation. At last he sat down in a chair, propped his brow in his hands, and began doing his very utmost to consider and settle something relating to his present position.